Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Zang is Assistant Professor of Sociology, Biostatistics, and Global Affairs at Yale University. Her research interests lie in the intersection of health and aging, marriage and family demography, and inequality. Her work aims to improve the understanding of how early life conditions affect later life health outcomes, the cohort patterns of fertility and mortality, the impact of public policies on household members' health outcomes, and social stratification in health. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for this very nice introduction. So let me try to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen right now? Okay, great. And thank you so much, Josh, for having me today. I'm so excited to be here to share one of my most recent work. This is joint work with two of my amazing PhD students, Keitaro Okura and Yushi. And this work is still work in progress, so we really appreciate any feedback. Let me first start with some background. In the United States, anti-abortion laws have been increasingly successful at the state level, especially in conservative, Republican-led states. States have enacted 1,313 abortion restrictions since Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, and almost half of them since the beginning of 2011. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court even overturned Roe v. Wade, ending right to abortion upheld for decades. Even though the Guttmacher Institute thought that 2021 could be considered the worst year for abortion rights in almost half a century, I think we all agree that it's only getting worse in some sense. And sex-selective abortion bans are a specific type of anti-abortion laws that has been increasingly popular over the last decade. Sex-selective abortion bans prohibit abortions on the basis of the sex of the fetus, particularly girls. The popularity of sex-selective abortion bans is kind of weird because the practice of sex selection is now typically regarded a problem in the United States. So why this ban has become so popular? Advocates for SSABS justified the passage of the bans by claiming that Asian immigrants in the United States disproportionately abort female babies because of a cultural preference for sons. As evidence, advocates extensively pointed to a study by Columbia economists that drew on the 2000 census data and found a sex racial bias occurring among Chinese, Indian, and Korean families if there was no previous son. Okay, so to be more specific, they did not find bi-sex ratio for the first birth. They found somewhat bi-sex ratio for the second birth, and they found particularly bi-sex ratio for the third birth. But the sample, notably, they used for the third birth among these Chinese, Indian, and Korean families only had 324 observations. However, later studies have pointed out that their findings are kind of misleading because there are so many ways to slice the data. Specifically, data from the 2007 to 2011 American Community Survey showed sex ratios are not male biased when all births were taken into account. In fact, foreign-born Chinese, Indians, and Koreans have higher proportions of girls than white Americans if we just look at the total sex ratio regardless of the parity. Legal scholars have also argued that sex ratio bias is not necessarily proof of sex selection practices. And if one really wants to select the sex of the infant, there are actually easier ways to do so and safer ways than sex-selective abortion. In addition, some evidence shows that some preferences are not culturally unique to Asian immigrants in the United States. So, for example, according to a Gallup poll conducted in 2011, when asked if they could only have one child, American men preferred a boy or a girl by a margin of 49 to 22%, whereas American women express no gender preference. Therefore, as we can see that criticizing Asian culture as male bias blinds the reality that some preferences are not unusual in all patriarchal societies, including the United States. At a minimum, it is an overreach to conclude that it is common for Asian immigrants in the United States to abort female babies, and that SSABs are therefore a sensible and effective policy solution. Sex-selective abortion bans are more of a solution in search for a problem, according to many legal scholars. Okay, so this map shows the prevalence of sex-selective abortion bans across the country. The first sex-selective abortion bans were enacted in Illinois and Pennsylvania in the 1980s. No states followed them in the next decade. However, interest in such restrictions resurged in 2009. In the past decade, 12 states successfully enacted sex-selective abortion bans. The dark blue states on the map are those who enacted the ban. Many other states attempted or are currently trying to do the same. The medium blue states proposed the ban but did not successfully pass it. The light blue states have not proposed the ban yet. So we may ask, why is the resurgence now? Well, in part, this trend reflects the broader expansion of anti-abortion policies across the United States. At the same time, the specific pursuit of the sex-selective abortion bans can be regarded as a nativist response to the rapidly changing demographics, notably in conservative southern and Midwestern states. These states, such as North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, and North Carolina, have experienced the fastest Asian and Hispanic immigrant population growth during the past decades. If we look at the absolute number of Asian immigrants, most of them are still in California and New York. But if we look at the growth rate, the fastest growth happened in these non-traditionally immigrant states. Previous studies have found that relative increases matter for perceptions of threat. Sex-selective abortion ban advocates tap into this growing anxiety about the recent influx of foreign outsiders coming to the state. They try to frame their concern around sex discrimination. For example, Southern Dakota state representative said the following in public. Let me tell you, our population in South Dakota is a lot more diverse than it ever was. There are cultures that look at a sex selection abortion as being culturally okay. And I will suggest to you that we are embracing individuals from some of those cultures in this country or in this state. And I think that's a good thing that we invite them to come, but I think it's also important that we send a message that this is a state that values life, regardless of its sex. Another South Dakota state representative, Stacey Nielsen, said the following. Well, many of you know I spent 18 years in Asia, and sadly, I can tell you that the rest of the world does not value the lives of women as much as I value the lives of my daughters. We can see that Asian immigrants have been used as a convenient foil to advance an anti-abortion agenda. They were really smart in a way that they were able to turn the tables of pro-choice criticism, which is the denial of women's rights, to pro-life advocates. Well, although there have been a lot of discussions among legal scholars, there has been only one empirical study that examined the consequences of sex-selective abortion bans. Nandy et al. In 2014 examined whether sex-selective abortion bans passed in Pennsylvania and Illinois in the 1980s affected Asian infant sex ratios and found it was not the case. But how about potential health consequences? For decades, sociologists have argued that population health is not simply determined by medical care, but it is also significantly shaped by various social factors, known as the social determinants of health. Social policies are an important social determinant of health. For example, previous studies have examined the consequences of the Arizona SB 1070 immigration bill and found that it negatively affects Hispanic immigrants' birth outcomes by increasing maternal stress. Well, we have a very interesting case here because sex-selective abortion bans are not immigration policies. They are abortion bans justified by singling out a growing foreign-born population. I think this is a very important reason that sex-selective abortion bans' impact on immigrants' health has been overlooked so far. We invoke the structural stigma framework to think about how sex-selective abortion bans may affect birth outcomes of Asian immigrant mothers. Based on the concept, societal cultural norms and beliefs, including widespread stereotypes, can affect the well-being of stigmatized populations. Note that this is very different from a closely related concept, which is structural racism. So structural racism is a much broader concept, and many prior studies using the structural racism framework has emphasized the mechanism of material resource separation. Well, in our case, we don't think material resource separation is the most important channel here, especially considering that the socioeconomic status of Asian immigrants on average is higher than white Americans, but the social climate is a major mechanism. We argue that sex-selective abortion bans negatively affected birth outcomes of Asian immigrant mothers by increasing the salience of harmful racial stereotypes and reinforcing a hostile social climate that is unwelcoming of Asian immigrants. Well, to be clear, we think the passage of sex-selective abortion bans itself is kind of a consequence of this already increasing anti-immigrant and anti-Asian sentiment. But the passage of this ban itself is also a cause of the further increasing anti-Asian, anti-immigrant sentiment, which could lead to worse birth health outcomes. We have two hypotheses. First, we hypothesize that the structural stigma that sex-selective abortion bans engender had a negative effect on the birth outcomes for infants of Asian immigrant mothers, measured by low birth weight and preterm birth. Second, we hypothesize that the passage of sex-selective abortion bans had little or no effect on the sex ratio of infants born to Asian immigrant mothers. Why we have the second hypothesis? First, there is no good evidence on the sex selection practice among Asian immigrants. And second, there are safer ways to perform sex selection than having a sex-selective abortion. So we just hypothesize sex-selective abortion bans won't be effective in affecting sex ratios of the infants born to Asian immigrant mothers. We use data from the 2005 to 2019.
Okay. Emma, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah. Josh, I cannot hear you. Josh, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, we're getting a couple of questions about what a sex-selective abortion ban is. How does the law define sex-selective abortion? Does it affect, say, a couple doing genetic testing, say IVF? What does it mean?
Yeah, so sex-selective abortion bans essentially, technically, it's just prohibit abortions on the basis of the sex of the fetus. And different states which pass the ban, they have different requirements, which I can talk in more detail later. So in some states, they did not have any other explanations except for the sentence that, well, we prohibit abortions based on the sex of the fetus. While in some other states, they have more detailed requirement, such as if a physician or abortion practitioner suspect this woman is getting abortion because of the sex of the baby, and then this physician have to ask this person a lot of questions. There are a lot of forms to be filled, and if the physician doesn't do so, then he may lose his license or he may end up in jail. So different states have different requirements regarding this ban, but I mean, in all these states, the essence of the ban is to prohibit abortions based on the sex of the infants.
But since most cases you don't have to give a reason for your abortion, I mean, the symbolic. You've been talking about the symbolic importance of it, but in terms of the, I guess what I'm interested in before you get to the data analysis, what's the parent or the mother's interaction with this law for most of them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what is interaction? So I think so actually our rationale is that this ban itself, the Asian immigrant mothers, they don't need to necessarily know about this ban. Because, well, if they know about this ban, then they may feel they're like stigmatized, right? So that would increase their maternal stress. But even if they don't know about this ban, and physicians must know this ban because they're required to do something, and the general public, when saying that kind of stereotypical narratives from the state's representative, and then that may affect their behavioral attitudes towards Asian immigrants in day-to-day life. And the social climate mechanism doesn't require like the Asian immigrant mothers actually to know this ban widely, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so now let's move on to the data. So we use data from the 2005 to 2019 natality birth data from the National Vital Statistics System. And this data has information on all registered US births. And we focus on this time range because 2005 is up to 5 years before the passage of the first sex-selective abortion bans invoking the stereotypes against Asian immigrants. And 2019 is the latest data we have. And we restricted data, we obtained restricted data about immigrant mothers' countries of origin and states of residence. We restricted the data to singleton births given by foreign-born mothers. And we excluded missing cases in outcomes and treated the missing observations in covariates as a separate category to maintain the sample size and also to avoid sample selection. So our final sample has more than 12 million births for all three outcomes we examined. And this table shows the main outcome variables and main covariates we have in the data. So we have three major outcomes. First is low birth weight, which is measured as lower than 2,500 grams. And the second outcome is preterm birth, which is measured as lower than 37 weeks of the pregnancy in terms of gestational age. And the third outcome is infant sex, which is the probability of having a male infant. So we include birth month as dummies, paternal race, ethnicity, infant sex, maternal and paternal educational attainments, mother's age and father's age, mother's marital status, live birth order, and number of prenatal visits as our covariates in the model to improve the precision of our estimates. Okay, so we employ a triple difference strategy to examine the effect of the sex-selective abortion bans. Our first difference is between states with sex-selective abortion bans and states without these bans. Our treatment group includes 7 states that enacted the ban during our study period. So although Illinois and Pennsylvania enacted the ban in the 1980s, these 2 states were excluded because they did not invoke xenophobic stereotypes about Asian immigrants. We also excluded Tennessee and Mississippi because they passed the ban in 2020, but the latest data we have is in 2019. We also excluded Indiana, Kentucky, and Arkansas because although they passed the ban, but a judge blocked it shortly after it was passed. So essentially, it was not effective. Our second difference is between before the ban was enacted and after the ban was enacted. Our third difference is between Asian immigrants and all other immigrants. Well, the triple difference estimator is the difference between 2 differences estimators. So namely, the first DID estimator is the DID estimator across years and states for Asian immigrants. And the second DID estimator is the DID estimator across years and states for all other immigrants. And the triple difference estimator is just the difference between these two DID estimators. It has much weaker assumption than the classic DID. So even if the two DID estimators are biased, the triple difference estimator can still be unbiased as long as the two DID estimators are biased in the same way. Here's our model specification. YIST is just our outcome variable for each individual, each state, in each year. And SSABS is a time-varying dummy and captures if a sex-selective abortion ban was enacted in state S and in year T. And the Asian I is an indicator for Asian immigrants versus other immigrants. And importantly, we included 3 sets of interaction terms, which really help us get rid of endogeneity to a large extent. So the first set of interactions is the interaction between year and state. This set of interactions can remove differential time trends of the outcome for different states. So for example, it could remove the effects caused by differential proportions of Asian immigrants across different states in each year, or the effects caused by annual unemployment rates across states. The second set of interaction terms is between being Asian and state dummies. So this set of interactions allow the effects of being an Asian immigrant to vary across different states, accounting for effects due to selective migration to each state among Asian immigrants. So for example, it is possible that relatively more conservative Asian immigrants, they may choose to migrate to more conservative states. And these interaction terms should help us handle that. And then the last set of interaction terms is between being Asian and the year dummies. So this set of interactions can allow the effects of being an Asian immigrant to vary over time, accounting for effects due to an increasing or decreasing trend of anti-Asian sentiment in all states over time. We also examine the dynamic effects of the bans, considering that it may take time for the effects to appear, because typically people need some time to react to some policies. So we explored the effects every year after the ban was enacted, and found that the 2-year mark after the ban was a substantively meaningful cutoff. So in this model, it's the same model sophistication, but the difference is SSAB was replaced by SSABD, which is a categorical variable with the following categories: not enacted, 0 to 2 years after enacted, and more than 2 years after enacted. Okay, so before looking at the model results, let's first look at some descriptive patterns. I think that the descriptive patterns are actually striking enough. This figure shows the prevalence of low birth weights over time by immigrant group. The descriptive pattern is already very striking because we can say for Hispanic, white, and Black immigrants, the prevalence in the treatment and control groups, meaning that in the states with and without the ban, is either indistinguishable or relatively parallel over time. However, if you look at Asian immigrants, the prevalence of low birth weight has been increasing over time. And if we look closely, then the incidence of the low birth weight surged in 2013 among states with sex-selective abortion bans, coinciding with the timing of the enactment of the ban in many states. The pattern is not observed among non-immigrant mothers. If we look at the prevalence of preterm births, we observe the same thing. The difference is only increasing among Asian immigrants and starting around 2013. So this figure shows the non-immigrant groups. Again, we don't see any pattern we saw among Asian immigrants. Now let's look at the triple difference estimates. In panel A, we see sex-selective abortion bans increase the probability of low birth weight and preterm births among Asian immigrant mothers by 0.3 and 0.5 percentage point, respectively, consistent with our first hypothesis. Also, consistent with our second hypothesis, we do not find evidence that the bans affect the sex ratio. Yeah.
We don't see the labels on the left or the bottom. Maybe you can change your slide a little bit smaller, or just tell us which.
Yeah, so let me try. Oh, I'm sorry.
Or maybe just tell us in words what the rows mean.
Yeah, so the square is the low birth weight results, and the triangle is the preterm birth results, and the circle is male infant. So we can say, so this middle line here is 0. If it doesn't overlap with 0, it means it's statistically significant at the 10% level. If the bar across 0, it means it's not significant. So here we can see
the circle of male birth.
Yeah, the circle is male birth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So it's a low birth weight, preterm birth, and sex ratio, like male birth. So as we can see, the coefficient for low birth weight and preterm birth are significant, but not the sex ratio in panel A. So this is Asian immigrants compared to all other immigrant mothers. So as Robustness Checks, we changed the reference to white immigrant mothers and white Americans instead of using all other immigrants as a reference. So the triple difference estimator is very, very strong, but still it has assumptions. And if we have consistent results by changing, using different kind of reference groups, and then this will give us a lot more confidence that our triple difference actually is giving us some kind of causal estimate. So results using different reference groups are shown in panels B and C, and are generally consistent with the results in panel A. So one exception is when compared with white immigrant, which is in panel B, the effect on sex, the effect on low birth weight is not significant at the 10% level, but the direction is still positive, and the p-value is just about 0.1. It's very close to 0.1. And another exception is in panel C, when we compare Asian immigrants to white Americans. The coefficient for male birth is now significant at the 10% level. This is the circle bar, and it's negative. So, but overall, we have pretty good evidence that sex-selective abortion bans negatively affected birth outcomes among Asian immigrants, based on the results across all the 3 panels. But I don't think we have very good evidence to say that the ban actually affected male births. So this figure shows the dynamic effects. Again, the circle is low birth weight. No, sorry. The first one is low birth weight. The second one is preterm birth, and the bottom one is male infant. And the dotted line indicates the effects for the first 2 years after the ban was passed, and a solid line indicates effects for 2 years after the ban was enacted. So we do not observe significant effects for the first 2 years after the bans were passed for any of the 3 outcomes we are looking at. The effects started to show up after 2 years, and this is for low birth weight and preterm birth. This is common to say when examining policy effects, as it often takes time for people to react to the policy, especially our hypothesized mechanism is the worsening social climate. And many previous studies examining policy consequences actually find the same kind of lagged policy effects. Okay, so although we couldn't directly test the causal mechanisms due to data limitation, we did some exploratory analysis to convince you of our story. So our hypothesis mechanism is the worsening social climate for Asian immigrants. Now, instead of the worsening economic material deprivation. So although we do not have a measure for Asian immigrants per se, we do have a measure for all immigrants. So the immigrant policy index was created by a group of public health scholars at Columbia University for each state in each year from 2009 to 2019, with more positive values indicating a more inclusive climate towards immigrants, and more negative value indicating a more exclusive climate towards immigrants. As shown in this figure, we see the gap between our treatment and control groups gets larger around 2013, suggesting that the passage of sex-selective abortion bans closely tracks an increasingly exclusionary social climate for immigrants. We also have some model results from statistical models, and which further confirm that sex-selective abortion bans significantly predict a more exclusionary social climate for for immigrants. Well, in our argument, we emphasize that the mechanism is more about social climate and is less about material or resources. Some may argue that sex-selective abortion bans as a type of anti-abortion bans may restrict access to abortion and prenatal care in general for all women, especially Asian immigrants, which may negatively affect birth outcomes. Well, this is plausible. To explore this possibility, we examined the effect of sex-selective abortion bans on 3 outcomes: the inadequate utilization of prenatal care services, measured by the number of prenatal visits smaller or equal to 5 times, and whether a mother started prenatal care in the first 2 trimesters and whether they used prenatal care at all. And we explored. We also explored additional potential mechanisms linking the ban. So basically, we use the same model sophistication and using these 3 outcomes as a dependent variable, but we do not find any evidence supporting this possibility. In fact, we find actually this ban leads to increased use of prenatal care utilization among Asian immigrants. So it is possible that the increased maternal stress actually increased prenatal care utilization among Asian immigrants. Well, another potential mechanism is that sex-selective abortion bans alters physicians' behaviors towards Asian immigrants. For example, sex-selective abortion bans may increase physicians' likelihood of engaging in profiling and interrogating foreign-born Asian women about their reasons for seeking an abortion. So differential physician behavior may harm infant health outcomes in at least 2 ways. So first, such behavior may increase maternal stress of Asian immigrant mothers. And second, such behaviors may make Asian immigrant mothers less likely to seek abortions and instead decide to carry out unwanted pregnancies. Both possibilities may lead to worse birth outcomes. We exploit sex-selective abortion bans heterogeneity in physician requirements in various ways to provide some indirect evidence for this mechanism. So in theory, if we may observe that the effects of the bans are stronger in states that impose more onerous or explicit physician requirements. For example, as we talked a little bit before, for some states, if the physician doesn't ask certain questions or doesn't do something, if they suspect an Asian woman is seeking abortion because of the sex of the baby, the physician may lose license or may end up in jail. While in other states, they don't have any explicit requirement, but they just say that you cannot perform abortion based on the sex of the baby. So if we find stronger effects in the former case, then we may have some evidence supporting the hypothesis that differential physician behavior could be the mechanism. However, our results do not support this possibility either. We tried a lot of ways trying to compare the magnitude of the effects using different sites of states as a treatment, but we just don't find any significant differences across the treatment states. Okay, so we also examined the heterogeneous effects by educational attainment. As seen in this figure, we find that the harmful effects of the bans are especially robust among Asian immigrant mothers with a college degree. If we test the coefficients between these 2 groups, the difference is significant at the 5% level. And this result further confirms our hypothesis that the mechanism is more about social climate and less about material resource deprivation. Because if it's about material resource deprivation, we would expect to see that the less educated group to be more affected, because we would say the more disadvantaged groups, they are more likely to be affected by material deprivation. But instead, we find more educated mothers are more affected, maybe because they are more attuned to changes in the social climate. Well, here is the result by infant sex. We did not find any evidence that male or female infants were more affected. And finally, We examined the heterogeneity by country of origin. Specifically, we examined whether immigrant mothers from China, India, and South Korea and North Korea were disproportionately harmed by sex-selective abortion bans because their home countries are stereotypically associated with sex selection practices. And results show that it is indeed the case. Actually, we only found harmful effects among mothers from these 4 countries, but not among mothers from all the other Asian countries. A comparison of the coefficients across subgroups is also significant at the 5% level. We conducted various robustness checks, and the results generally support our main results and hypothesis. We can come back to this if people have questions. And just to quickly run through the checks we have done, so we include a specific month of the sex-selective abortion ban enactment in each state. Results are consistent. We tried continuous measure of birth weight and gestational age. The results are consistent too. We conducted leave 1 out analysis. We also conducted placebo tests of not being driven by sex-selective abortion bans, but something else, by basically saying that we pretend the ban was passed like 2 years before its actual enactment date, and use that as a placebo period. And the results pass the placebo test as well. And we also look at whether it's more about the anti-abortion bans in general rather than the sex-selective abortion bans, by only looking at the effects among states that only had sex-selective abortion bans but without any other anti-abortion bans. And we also look at the effects of the sex-selective abortion bans among other racial ethnic minority groups. And we also look at the effects of bans on the likelihood of multiple births. So here I would like to highlight the results examining the effects of sex-selective abortion bans on other immigrant and non-immigrant groups. So we did not find sex-selective abortion bans negatively affect any other group except for Asian immigrants, not any other immigrant group, and not Asian Americans. So these results really tell us it is not about Asians as a whole. It is not about immigrants as a whole. It's about the intersectionality between being Asian and being an immigrant. Okay, to conclude, the rapid increase in Asian immigrants has been accompanied by the rise in anti-Asian and anti-immigrant sentiments. Conservatives have taken advantage of this backlash to exploit Asian immigrants as a convenient foil to advance an anti-abortion agenda. Sex-selective abortion bans are justified by playing on harmful racial stereotypes about Asian immigrants and their cultural preference for sons. And sex-selective abortion bans had a negative effect on the infant birth outcomes of Asian immigrants. Specifically, we find it increased the probability of a low birth weight and a preterm birth, but we didn't have strong evidence to say it actually affected infant sex ratio. And in addition, we find the effect is stronger among more educated mothers and mothers from China, Korea, India, South Korea, and North Korea. Well, there are a couple of limitations of the study. Although we have tried to employ a strong identification strategy theoretically, because it is not a randomized trial, it is not a randomized control trial, it is still possible that unobserved factors may still confound our results. We do conduct a lot of robustness checks. And then data limitations do not allow us to directly testing the mechanisms. And third, some states in our sample enacted sex-selective abortion bans quite recently, so we were not able to include these states. So our results have important theoretical and practical implications. Theoretically, our results show how state laws that symbolically target and stigmatize marginalized groups generate harmful consequences for population health. Specifically, we showed this is the case for Asian immigrants, which is an extremely understudied population in sociology or population health in general. So my students and I have actually searched all the published articles in ASR and AGS in the past 20 years. Not a single article talks about Asian immigrant and health. And in this case, importantly, we show that compared to other previous studies, especially among Asian immigrants, the main mechanism through which social policies can negatively affect population health is not through the channel of material deprivation. It's actually through the worsening social climate. And our findings also have implications to policymakers who are interested in the processes of immigrant incorporation. Classic theories of assimilation posit that decreasing socioeconomic boundaries between natives and immigrants would inevitably lead to a sense of shared peoplehood. And our findings show that this is not true. The pathway for Asian immigrants to achieve genuine symbolic belonging in American society is hampered by sentiments of xenophobia and nativism. And third, this topic is of timely public policy interest, given the rapid expansion of abortion restrictions and the Supreme Court decision in the summer of 2022 overturning Roe v. Wade. And finally, our investigation into the consequences of sex-selective abortion bans also comes at a time when hate crimes targeting Asians have spiked, increasing by more than 300% from 2020 to 2021, owing largely to the rise in anti-Asian sentiment during the COVID-19 pandemic. The anti-Asian and immigrant sentiment associated with the pandemic likely lead to worse population health among Asians Asians in America, and we need more research on that. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, so we have a lot of people online, a few people in this room. Let's just start out with some of the online questions. Ron, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, my attendance was very interrupted, so I may have missed important chunks. But my main question really is about similar policies in sending countries in Asia, in the countries of origin. I thought, for example, that China had a law against sex-selective abortion. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that and whether you would expect the consequences of such laws to be different in the US than in the sending countries for immigrants. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This is a very interesting question. So I think you're right. In China and also I think in India, there are some like laws banning sex-selective abortion, but they are in completely different contexts. So to be sure, there are sex selection practices in China and in India. So this is some kind of fact, especially in underdeveloped regions. But what makes this sex-selective abortion bans unique in the United States is when they justify the passage of the ban, they invoke harmful stereotypes against Asian immigrants. So yes, there are sex selection practices in India and China, but does that mean Chinese and Indian immigrants in the United States actually have the same sex selection practice? I think we don't have solid evidence about that. And the framing of the ban by conservatives just like kind of confirm the already existing stereotypes against Asian immigrants in America. So another example I would like to mention is in Texas, there was a very controversial event last year. So in their textbook among in primary schools, when I think that's the subject of social studies, and then they explicitly said some preferences a culture in China, and that was very controversial and generated a lot of controversies because it is not a culture in China, and as a lot of people have shown, it is now like culturally unique, even to Asian culture. So I think the American context in how they frame the ban makes it very different from the sex-selective abortion bans in China and in India.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting talk. Thanks.
Jenna Nobles, did you have a question? Okay, I'll ask my question then while we're waiting. The increase in stress from the debate about sex-selective abortion bans, that's one source of anti-immigrant stress, but there's lots of others in this time period. Presumably those others would be very large indeed, much more powerful. So would you expect really, really big effects from things like the recent increase in anti-Asian violence or certain rhetoric from the Trump administration or certain policies of the Trump administration? I guess I find the direction of your results plausible. I can't imagine that a debate about sex-selective abortion would be a positive thing for Asian immigrants living in the state. But I guess I'm just worried about the magnitude. If you find these pretty big effects for something that I would think would be relatively small, then we should find enormous effects for things that we think are large.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, for this question. And so first of all, let's talk about the magnitude of the effect. And it's actually pretty small. So I wouldn't say it's small. I would just say, well, it's expected. It makes sense. So we wouldn't expect sex-selective abortion bans to have a huge effects on like things like low birth weight or preterm birth. But we do find significant negative effects. And I would try to argue that any negative effects are not trivial. And then second, how about the other more important or more major events that are anti-immigrants? So I agree that those are. Yeah.
The first one, how do we say whether these are big or small? 0.5% seems like a lot. If it's a 0.5% change in the sex ratio in the third panel, the bottom, that's a huge effect. 0.5% change in the sex ratio. I don't know how much.
No, this is like 0.005, not 0.5%. Right. So I mean, if you look at for most of the coefficients for male infant is not significant. So only when we compare immigrant mothers to white American mothers, so we have this significant coefficient for male infant. So the magnitude is a little bit more than 0.005 percentage point.
And I'm interpreting that as 0.5%, but is that the wrong interpretation?
Are
these like elasticities? Is that what they kind of are, or what are they?
No, they're just like dummy. So the dependent variable is just dummy. Okay. Infant, no infant or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you were going to say about the second part about how big we would expect the effects from other things to be.
Yeah, so there are other major events. I agree, and I think it's really important to examine the consequences of those major stuff. So my focus on sex-selective abortion bans because it's specifically targeting Asian immigrants. Which I think Asian immigrants is an understudied population. So to convince you that our effects are not driven by other major events that are targeting on all immigrants. Again, when we look at the effects on sex-selective abortion bans on other immigrants, such as Black immigrant, white immigrant, Hispanic immigrant, we didn't find any harmful effects. So that for the consensus, the effect we see here among Asian immigrants, they're not driven by other major events, which would have affected all immigrants.
Is it the room that I can call in? Jenna, can you hear me? You had a question that you wanted to ask? Jenna Nobles? I think she's off. Great. So could you get, I guess the other thing I was interested in was, I had a couple other interests. One was, is there any way that you could, maybe not, you haven't done it yet, but you could in theory measure the kind of rhetoric, since it's the rhetoric that you think is driving things. So looking at the transcripts of the legislative debates or things like that. You showed us a couple of quotes, which I thought were very interesting, but is there, have you thought about ways to do that, or is that maybe something for another project to get a sense of, like you distinguished some, you said there was no xenophobic discussion in Pennsylvania, for example.
Right. At that time when the ban was passed. Right. So we tried to interview someone. We tried to interview some Asian immigrant mothers to see if they know about the ban, and if they know about the ban, what's their reaction. So we haven't had any success in recruiting any Asian immigrant mothers living in those conservative states which passed the ban during that time period. They're very difficult to find, but we did interview some physicians about the ban. But the physicians basically told us that, well, even if so she's a physician, she's an OB in New York City, so she was saying that even if the ban was passed in New York City, her colleague and her wouldn't do anything about the ban. They wouldn't do what the ban was asking. So we didn't actually have any evidence from our conversation with the physicians that physicians would actually do something to harm Asian immigrants' health, which actually is consistent with our robustness checks in some sense. It's not the physician behavior. Yeah, so I would love to hear any other suggestions about how we could make we can collect more of this, like negative stereotypes.
I guess the major thing I was thinking was that these kind of quotes, you could get them from every state debate and get a sense of how, like you already have a little sense of this, sounds like informally, but that might be something that would be worth actually measuring. And then you could show that in states that had a larger discussion, or whether it was more in the media or anything like that,
right,
that you had a larger effect. That would be very, at least I would find that very convincing. Okay, I see we're already at 1 o'clock. So let's, everybody can unmute and thank Emma. Let's see.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're getting some more ideas in chat from people, so we'll forward the chat to you, Emma.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Emma, for a really exciting talk. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of discussion about your talk here afterwards. I'll try to fill you in on it. And just thanks again for sharing it with us. And thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everybody for attending.
Students who want to stay should stay online. I think Emma has kindly agreed to stay a little bit longer to talk to us.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.